Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Normally, I've been starting these videos kind of declaring how awful Tottenham Hotspur's week has been, the ridiculous things that have come out and have got them an absolute PR disaster. Since the last video was done, they actually haven't been that bad. They obviously reversed the furloughing decision and the 80% pay cut. Club taking on full salaries for the next 2 months at least for all their staff. So that's great news, and obviously I think is a real testament to fan power. Certainly I know there was a bit of an outcry, or quite a lot of an outcry across nationwide, across fans and even MPs and the media. But actually I think it was the Spurs fans who were probably the most vociferous in their just disappointment, and a lot of them were quite ashamed at what had happened. And I think them with the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust really becoming a collective voice for them and in being in dialogue with the club got that decision overturned. And I think that was a real statement of the fans having a voice. I think that was so important. Often the fans feel that they are just literally taken on this ride, however good or bad it is. And I thought this was quite a nice display of the fans looking out for the club staff. And I know quite a few members of the club staff, and I think they were quite touched as well by it, by what happened. So yeah, so a bit of a positive, and obviously the good stuff the club's doing. I always mention about the bad stuff, so I want to obviously mention the good stuff. North Middlesex Hospital getting their maternity ward coming into the stadium and being used. That's fantastic. It takes all of these pregnant ladies away from the hospital where that you've got obviously a greater chance of picking up the coronavirus. And other little things they're doing, food drives that are being led from the stadium, testing facilities downstairs, I always forget the name of it, and forgive me for it, but the sixth form college that they've got in Lillywhite House, they're making loads of masks for PPE for the staff and the medical staff to be able to wear. They're doing a lot of good things, and I really hope that doesn't go under the radar because of the pretty daft thing that they did beforehand. But anyway, this video is another Q&A. I know I've done one of these before and people seem to respond to it, quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed it myself. So we've got 35 more questions put by you, the lovely people underneath the comments. Obviously not every comment is lovely, but that's the internet for you. But you really kind of get into the spirit of it. It's great. So there's 35. So what I'm going to obviously say, as I've said in the last time I did this, 35 questions, work that out in how many minutes kind of per one. So I'm going to try and keep the answers as short as I can. I'm sorry if I don't answer them to the fullest how you wanted them asked, but if you work it out, 35 questions, if I take 5 minutes on it, at least we're going to be here for a long, long time. So I'm going to try and rattle through them, but hopefully I can give you as much info as I possibly can. Let's start off. I am Spartacus, not me personally, but it's the username. Why have the players not taken a wage cut? Because that's a whole other kind of mess that's still got to be sorted out. I know at the start this was one of the things the club got a bit of flack for, which actually wasn't their fault in the whole mess of the early stuff, is that the players are very much a separate thing. Their contracts are so kind of locked down, and I think cast iron is probably the best expression to use, and you can't, it's so much harder to just say, right, you're getting your wages reduced or anything like that. It doesn't really work like that. So then there's the added element of the PFA. There has to be more of a collective outlook to it. And I think it certainly seemed like there were some suggestions that they didn't want the players to make individual deals with the clubs. And I can kind of understand how that can be problematic. Obviously, whenever you have a union, that's the kind of idea, is to not put anyone in a particular hardship compared to others. And obviously there's also this, if you say, I don't know, a straight 30% pay cut, there's other added factors of younger players losing out on 30% of their wages, which they might rely on. You've got, if you do it as a straight wage cut, is then how much is then going to the government, and obviously by a product of that, the NHS. So those taxes obviously are quite important in rebuilding the economy. So then it comes into, do you take deferrals? And some, I think I read some of the reports about what Arsenal are trying to do. It's taking a pay cut for a year. These are quite big measures because of how absolutely stuffed football kind of is right now. The income have just been shut off. So that's really why it hasn't happened yet. And also, without putting too fine a point in it, we know how tough a negotiator Daniel Levy is at the best of times. So in a situation like this, I can imagine it must be quite a tough scenario, because obviously he wants to do the best for the club. Players will want to also do the best for the club, but now have this added kind of feeling that, well, at least the staff have been taken care of, the non-playing employees, those 550 staff. So there's less kind of pressure on them. I think there was a little bit of disappointment that for early Tottenham decision, because it seemed to be putting the pressure on the players. But now that's gone. Hopefully they'll get down to it, because I think a lot of clubs, and I know people say, oh, these massive incomes that the clubs are getting, they don't need this, but they do. The players' wage is such a massive outgoing from a club that is getting no incoming at the moment. Hopefully that will get soon, come through soon. Or where that I've talked about not answering too long questions, and the first one I've rattled on. So let's get straight to the next one. Jeremy Colwell asks, what do you think will become of Tanguy Ndombele? Well, as I kind of referred to in the last one, although it was wrong the way I went about it, and it went against guidelines, the fact that Jose Mourinho was going to Ndombele's apartment complex and getting him outside, doing a session with him, shows that he believes in him. I think if you had a player that he didn't give a crap about, he would just let him rot. But he's not. He clearly knows. He understands it. You know, he said this. I've asked him plenty of times about Ndombele, and he always says the same thing. This guy's got fantastic talent. It's just about adapting him to what is required in the Premier League. So I'm not going to go over old ground with Ndombele. People know my opinions on him. I think he's a wonderful player to watch. But I also think there's a side to him that hasn't quite clicked yet, of the demands and the rigours of professional football life. And I think that's not just me. I think if you look at various clubs, that's been kind of held against him. And it's something that you just know the moment that penny drops, what a player Tottenham are going to have. And it's up to Mourinho to get it out of him. So I think he will. Normally try and be quite a positive guy, and I think that Mourinho will get through to him. THFC CFHT, see what you've done there. Is it palindronic? Is that the expression? Can our stadium be extended? From everything I believe it can. I think obviously there's a hell of a lot to it. I don't think it's as easy as saying yes it can. I think you would then have to go through the whole planning process again, of course, and there's a question of the infrastructure, local infrastructure around it. But I'm pretty sure going through the process when they were looking at the exact attendance or capacity it could be, they kind of dropped from their initial estimates. They wanted it to be quite bigger, and they brought it down to what it is now, which is, in the early 60s, and I think that will continue to creep up, as they're doing with little bits of the stands and stadium being found new seating areas. And I think one day, I get the logic. I mean, you look at Wembley and you look at Tottenham had almost 90,000 people in there at times. The fan base is there. I just think you start to sell out your stadium consistently, and then you start looking at that. It's kind of the right business model to do. Otherwise, you have what also happened at Wembley, when you'd have 20, 30,000 in there, and it was an absolute cavernous, weird cauldron of no noise. Simple answer, I believe it can, but I think there's a lot more to it than just saying yes. I think there's so many planning regulations, and the infrastructure and everything around would have to be improved. Sean Hurl asks, who do you think will replace John McDermott, and did Poch leaving the club influence him? Spurs are casting their net quite wide for this. They want to get the right man, because don't forget, John McDermott has been there for, I think it's 15, 16, maybe more years. I see a lot of people kind of giving some unfair flack about, or how good can he have been? I always say this, I know a lot of people don't always agree with it, but academies are not just there to provide the first team. That's their primary target, but also their other kind of main target, which is probably something that is more of a day-to-day thing, is getting hundreds of players, when you take all the youth levels, and at least giving them some kind of professional career. And especially even if they only make the Championship, League One, League Two, you're still kind of refinancing, in a way, the academy itself. And I think in McDermott's time, there's been a lot of players. You look at the Kanes, the Winks. Obviously, Skip is a Premier League player now. Tanganga, and we're just talking about recent ones. You go back further, you've got Townsend, Ryan Mason, Nabil Bentaleb. Obviously, came through kind of through the academy. And while people might say, "Oh, these aren't great talents," the Bentalebs, the Masons, and Townsends. These are guys that, some of them, they've become internationals. And I think he has got a really good track record. And I think it's a big loss for Spurs. Really well-respected guy. Obviously I'd come across him many times in the youth games. Very very serious chap, but very well respected. And in terms of who will replace him, like I say, I think they're going to cast their net wide. I don't think they're not going to rush into it. They've got a bit of time. Obviously, there's lots of there's like a hierarchy there that's already in place with, you've got Wayne Burnett in charge of the under-23s right now. You've got various other staff members. There's an academy manager, the under-18s, obviously, whose name's gone right out of my head, which is really annoying. Matty Taylor. You've got Ryan Mason in there as well. And there's a whole kind of structure that's there. So that can kind of remain in place, almost as if John McDermott's on holiday. But they're going to have to find the right guy. And it's got to be someone that then can take it to the next level, because that's always what Tottenham has been about. Second part of that question, did Pochettino going influence him? I don't believe so. They were very close. We know Poch used to spend quite a few parts of his day sat on John McDermott's couch in his office, which is on the other side of Hotspur Way, just to kind of get away from the stresses of his day. I don't believe that's the case. I mean, you could argue, people will come and say Mourinho doesn't use young players, but then you can look at the amount of young players he has actually used, quite a few. A lot of them have had their debuts, so I don't think it's going to be that case. I think he's got a different brief at Tottenham than he has. I think it's just a case of a guy who's done the same job for a very long time and just wanted to try something different, and it's the FA's gain. GN asked, time to change goalkeeper and make Harry Kane captain. I don't believe there'll be a change in goalkeeper this summer. I think personally, Hugo Lloris, I know he's made mistakes and people will always kind of hold that against him, but I think in terms of working with Nuno Santos, the goalkeeping coach, and Mourinho, when he came back from his injury, we're looking at maybe just around a month before football shut down. So we're not talking about a lot of time to work with the new manager and the goalkeeping coach. And I think that they'll have time. I think they'll have a look at next season. And Lloris, as I always say, has got that rare thing that a lot of Tottenham Hotspur players don't have, which is a winning mentality and experience. The guy has won he's held aloft the biggest trophy in world football, the World Cup. He knows how to do it. He's played at these enormous games. I don't think you ditch someone like that right now. I think he's 33. Maybe you look next year when he's 34 and you have a little look at it. They're certainly going to need a new third goalkeeper unless they decide on Brandon Austin or Alfie Whiteman, because Michel Vorm's contract's coming to an end. But I can't see Lloris being replaced this summer. And making Harry Kane captain, I see the logic in it. Although, personally, I don't. And this is only a personal opinion, it might be quite harsh. I kind of felt during that period after Lloris got injured, and before then and when Poch left, I didn't see an absolutely inspirational captain in Harry Kane. I think there probably is one in there. I just felt slightly, maybe disappointed. I think I expected a bit more from him. I think I always keep that Brighton game in my head in that second half after Lloris got injured. I didn't see a guy absolutely grabbing the team by the scruff of the neck. It may just be, it was a tough time and everyone was a bit down, but I think in those tough moments you need someone to step up. Hopefully that will come. But no, I don't think while Lloris is still there, they change captain. Thomas Watson asks, what would you say about Spurs signing Iberi Eze, I always pronounce that wrong, it could be Eze, and Dennis Zakaria? Well, Eze is certainly a player that Spurs have watched for a while. Young QPR attacking midfielder, very talented guy. I think they'll look at him in the summer, but I'm sure we're going to come back to this in other questions, but finance is going to be a big thing this summer for a lot of clubs. I know there's a logic that all player prices will drop. I don't think that will actually be the case because of the clubs that will put themselves, not at risk, but will dig deeper into cash reserves to sign players. I don't think prices will come down. But I do wonder, maybe in the Championship, maybe there's some of those clubs that will be close to going to the wall. You will be able to pick up possibly bargains like Spurs could have for Jack Grealish a couple of summers ago, but they absolutely messed that one up. And he's certainly a really good young player that I keep an eye on. They've got a good relationship with QPR. Luke Amos is there, Jack Clark's there now. Mark Warburton's the manager. I think there's a little kind of a tie-up somewhere along the lines. I'm trying to remember where it is. Something with the academy stuff. There's certainly a kind of a friendship in there. So yeah, he's one I can definitely see they would go for. It's a crowded position, but Spurs like to invest in the future. And a bit like Bergwijn, he'd be similar. Dennis Zakaria, Borussia Mönchengladbach defensive midfielder, ticks a box in terms of another young player, a position that Spurs do need someone in. I just worry about some of the price tag talk has been around 40 million, and I don't know, people won't want to hear this, but I kind of wonder whether I can't see Spurs paying that sort of money this year. They spent almost 200 million on transfers last season. I think with the financial issues that are going to be very commonplace, certainly if they lose any of the income or don't get it back that they're losing right now, I can't see massive deals like that. Aromal SP, apologies, some of these obviously aren't names, they're usernames, asked, Toby Alderweireld was benched in the last few games. Who's the first choice centre-back now? I think he's still first choice centre-back. Obviously, he's not quite the player he was. You know, he's obviously on the other side of 30 now. But I think he's Mourinho's man, very much so. He signed that new deal very much with Mourinho in mind. And I don't think Mourinho trusts anyone else in those central positions of his current squad quite as much as he does Alderweireld. So I'd say he probably is still the first choice. Nigel Chawanga asks, if we could sell Harry Kane, could we replace him in the current market? I think that's another big issue. That's a good question because I can see what you're angling that at, and I kind of agree. I think if we're looking at, you know, Spurs have made it very clear that they've got no intention of selling Harry Kane this summer. However, you know, there's the old game of money talks, and if the player were to kick up a fuss, I think they'd look for a world record fee. So you'd be looking at something like 200 million. Very few teams can actually afford that, and if they can, do they want Harry Kane? For me, I don't. For Spurs, I think he's almost irreplaceable. I think even with the injuries each season, he's banging in 25 plus goals a season. How can you know, it's a big gamble. Whatever you throw on a player from another country to come in and do the same thing. And the reason I say other countries is because of that adaptation period we're seeing with various players. It's a massive risk. It's one of those where you're getting lots of money in, but are you a bit like Bale and replacing him with the Magnificent Seven, as they called? Did they ever get as good a first 11 as they had with Gareth Bale in it? And I think the answer probably was no, despite the fact that some of those players have gone on to be good players for Spurs over the years after. So I kind of know what you're getting at, and I don't think they could replace him in the current market with a similar player. I think we've all got these strikers that we could probably pluck out of the air. We see them in their YouTube clips, or we play them as them on FIFA Football Manager, things like that. But actually, in realistic terms, doing it in the Premier League is very different, and I think that would be a tough one. Alex Stiliano asks, any truth in the Willian rumours? It's one position I thought we'd covered, even though he's a really good player. Pretty sure there is truth in these rumours. He's a player that obviously Mourinho knows inside out. He's got a great relationship with him. We know he famously chose Mourinho over Spurs despite having done his medical with Tottenham. He's another one, and we'll come to other players like this later on. He's a guy that is a winner, and he's available for free. And in that current market, I don't think you turn down that type of player if you can get him. And it does also free you up maybe to move on another player. And I think we're going to come to this player later on, if I remember one of the questions I've got. It frees up possibly selling another player who you could get money for while you're bringing in a very experienced, very good player for free. It may have to be the way with the finances this summer. Clubs are going to have to operate, you know, loan deals, swaps, free transfers, players in the last year of their contract that will be cheaper. It's not sexy and it's not what fans want to hear, but I think that's going to be the way a lot of clubs will operate, and I can see Tottenham doing that. Raphael Debrashian Yates asks, what happened to Dyer and Dele's bromance? It's funny you should say that, because I don't know if anyone was watching Instagram last night, but they did a really long, couple of hour long Instagram live together. And it was good fun. Anyone that watched them on, it was like a charity celebrity Goggle Box they did a couple of years ago, the two of them. They're a funny pair together, and they were on it for hours, and they admitted in it that they'd been on the phone to each other for 4 hours a couple of days before. Don't worry about that bromance, it's going strong. It was quite amusing. They like to take the mickey out of each other. So Henry Sago asks, don't you think it's time for Enoch and Levy to move on? Ooh, the biggie that is constantly, essentially every comment under mostly everything I write is dominated by that subject. You've got the people that have got frustrated, and I understand their thoughts. In 20 years of Enoch's ownership, one trophy and a League Cup it is. It's not great. Then you've got the other people who will look at it and say, but in those 20 years, the club that Tottenham Hotspur are now is unrecognisable to the one it was, because best stadium in the world, arguably one of the best training grounds in the world as well. And it's just a very different kind of Tottenham Hotspur. People are going to hate this because they don't like people that don't have an extreme view either way. But I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I think there's maybe a slightly false perception about how much money they take out of the club. It really doesn't actually seem to be much, if any at all. I think it will be when they sell it. And I think that's the difference. I think when they do sell it, I was about to say they're going to be very rich men. They're obviously rich men already, but I don't think it's a case of they're absolutely squeezing the club for everything they can, which is what some fans think. So I don't really subscribe to that theory. I do subscribe to the theory that there's been key times when they haven't pushed the club on. I think you only have to look at. I was looking at a little stat that came up about I think it was a team that finished second to Chelsea that year with Pochettino, which was such a good team, arguably the better team, and also very similar team, obviously, to the one that finished third in the Leicester year as well. And you just think, what a brilliant team it was. It topped so many of the different things. I think it was the one where, and I know it's a useless stat, but if you took that team over the 2 years, and the Premier League was a 2-year season, Spurs would have finished top. It was a great team. Best defence, most chances created, so many goals scored. But I think that's probably pretty inexcusable that in the transfer windows that followed that great period, Spurs didn't push on. And I think that will rank as kind of one of their biggest failings. Do I think, I'm kind of dancing around the actual question with all of that, though. Do you think it's time for them to move on? I think we're getting towards the end of the period. I think Mourinho is almost, I don't want to use a last roll of the dice, but I think this is the biggie. You know, you've replaced an incredibly popular manager who had changed the landscape of Tottenham Hotspur, really, had really taken them to another platform. And I think this is the biggie now. You've been able to attract the world's most decorated, or one of the world's most successful managers. I think if this doesn't work, then perhaps it is time to move on. But I don't make the decision. So, like I said, I do want to point out I do see all the good things they've done. I just think in terms of the football on the pitch side of things, I think there's been so many missed opportunities. So yeah, let's see what happens in the Mourinho era. Jordan Hussein asks how Sacramento was brought in as a highly rated coach who likes to press, but why haven't we seen that in this Tottenham Hotspur team? I think it's a time thing. He is, incredibly highly rated. He obviously, that Lille team played really good football, and he had an influence on the Monaco team before as well when he was there. I think we're looking at, it's so difficult to judge Tottenham. This is why I think the Mourinho stuff, he gets a lot of flack as well. And I just feel what was it, November he came in, so what are you looking at, maybe 4 months, if that, slightly over. Ridiculous amount of injuries, having to essentially make up systems to account for a lack of players in certain positions. And when we talk about pressing, my goodness, look at the last few months of the Pochettino era. They were an absolute mess in terms of players not pressing. I remember asking Pochettino about the pressing at once, and I said, I asked him something about, like, are you disappointed? Were you pleased with it? Because it was a match, I can't remember which one it was, but there was more pressing in it. And I said, are you pleased? And he quite honestly said, well, no, actually, I want more from them, but they're not giving it to me. And I think that's a key thing. It's kind of the mindset at Tottenham that absolutely needs a shake-up. And this is one of these things where, as a weird quirk of a horrific situation across the world, this break in football, I think it will benefit Tottenham in that way as well, because when their players return, they're going to have this almost like a full pre-season. And then during which Mourinho and Sacramento are probably going to be able to drill in what they want from these players. And you'd imagine, having not had football for so long as well, they're going to be desperate to do exactly what they're told and get out there and play football. So, yeah, I think it's more a time issue. I think we come back to this maybe halfway through next season. And if you're not seeing it, then definitely there's a strange issue going on there. But right now, I don't believe so. Lockie Black asks, are Tottenham actually high on Aurier, or is it a facade? I think I kind of get what that means. people know my opinion on Serge Aurier. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I think he's a guy who delivers probably more consistently this season going forward, which is great. But ultimately, he's a right back. And do I feel he fulfills all the duties of a right back to the highest level? No, I don't. I just don't think his defending or his anticipation and awareness and tracking back are good enough. I'd be very surprised if in a couple of seasons he's Spurs' first choice right back. I just can't see it. And as I've said before, very interesting character. Had a real sit down, really interesting interview with him. Sat down for him almost half an hour once. Very interesting upbringing and life. But in terms of a defender, I wouldn't rate him that highly. But he's a popular guy, very popular in the dressing room. Stephen Lloyd asked, what are your thoughts on Tom Huddleston? Ooh, we're going retro there. Say retro, not that long ago, but I used to really like Tom Huddleston. I thought technique-wise, he was probably one of the best midfielders Tottenham have seen in years at that point. Some of the passes, he just cut across the football, and it was ridiculous. His crossfield balls. Really weirdly, complete coincidence, a couple of days ago, I watched someone had put a compilation video together of some of his kind of just the passes and some of his best moments. He was phenomenal in terms of his technique and picking out a player. I think the problem almost with Tom Huddleston was he had a turning circle of the Titanic. He was absolutely just not a guy you could rely on in fast-paced games. He was a bit like, kind of like an NFL quarterback. He could do everything you want, or say an old-school NFL quarterback, not one of the more mobile ones, not a Russell Wilson type, but someone who actually is more of a static kind of big arm kind of guy or big foot kind of guy in the football sense. And I just think there was a lot of talent just wrapped up in a player who maybe wasn't ready for the modern game. You do wonder how in a previous era he might have been one of the greats, but just not in the era he was in. But a terrific player. Really, really used to enjoy watching him play. But I just think when you hit the next level and you had the pressing and stuff like that came into the game, I just don't think it quite worked. I always remember quite famously, he was the one of the players who struggled with Juan de Ramos coming in and the new dietary kind of requirements and things like that. And he slimmed down a lot, I remember, during that time. And it didn't actually affect his play in a good way either. But no, really, really good player. John Camiso asked, would you get Scott Parker, I'm doing a Boston accent there. Would you get Scott Parker back for the under-23s? Well, that's a lovely thought. I think Scott Parker being Fulham manager is probably not going to want to come back and do under-23s football right now. I think Wayne Burnett, who's the under-23s head coach, gets a lot of flack from maybe, and this is maybe perhaps unfair to say, maybe fans that haven't watched a lot of the under-23 football, so they're kind of seeing results, and the results are mixed. But I think if you kind of dig a little bit deeper, you'll see that the under-23s team, especially in the last 18 months or so, has been a really, really young team. There's been a shift in policy at Spurs where a lot of the older players have been put out on loan, which means that you've got an under-23s team that has got a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds, and that's, well, as you see at other levels of youth football, if you're using younger players against teams that maybe have older players in it, you're going to get mixed results. And obviously there's the other kind of thinking, is under-23s football and under-18s football about winning, or is it about developing players for the first team? So, yeah, long way of getting around that. I can't see Scott Parker coming back for the under-23s. Purav Bhatt asks, I read Real Madrid will let Gareth Bale go for free. Can Spurs using it as a battering ram, even though he'd have to take a pay cut? Gareth Bale. If anyone's heard me talk about a Gareth Bale question before, I apologise for going into a mini rant because we're not going to go into a long one. Just can't see it. Can't see Gareth Bale ever returning to Tottenham unless you're talking many years in the future as a coach, and I can't ever see him going into coaching either. His agent, Jonathan Barnett, has made it very clear that Spurs probably wouldn't ever be a destination for him. He's on, I think it's reportedly about 650 grand a week at Real Madrid. That is, just to put into perspective, more than 3 times what Harry Kane, Tottenham's top earner, earns. Would you use one of the most mobile, exciting kind of wingers in his day as a battering ram striker as well? Probably not. Don't get me wrong, Gareth Bale in that last year for Tottenham was phenomenal. one of the best players I've seen kind of live at Tottenham. But I just can't see him ever coming back. Even for free, I can't see it happening. I also can't imagine Real Madrid will actually let him go for free, because I think he's still got about 3 years left on his deal. Chad Mercer asks, why do you think Son doesn't get stronger interest from big clubs? It's quite an interesting one, but let's keep it quiet because I think they're mad. He's a great player. I used to give him quite a lot of flack for his inconsistency, especially in front of goal, and I think he's sorted a lot of that out. He still does miss some big chances, but I think overall he's become a much more consistent player. And I think the players know this. Look at Virgil van Dijk did a five-a-side team out of non-Liverpool players, and he had Son in there. And I think a lot of other players rate him incredibly highly as like one of the toughest players they've come up against, certainly defenders. But I just think, strangely, out there doesn't seem to be this acceptance that he's one of the Premier League's best. And I think Spurs are probably absolutely delighted about that. So yeah, let's probably not talk about that too much, because I'm sure all the big bosses in world football are watching this. Let's have a look. Where else I am? Oh, cracking username here. He 0011. How far are Spurs away from winning the Premier League and the Champions League? Champions League, we just under a year ago, they were very close. They absolutely messed it up in the final, though. Probably the best chance, well, definitely the best chance they've ever had. So Champions League, it just shows that you can win it any year, really, if you can put a string of results and have that spirit together. Premier League, I think that's probably tougher. I think there's a lot of teams out there. Obviously, you've got City and Liverpool, and then you've got other teams that are going to improve. I think the Mourinho factor will play a part. I would be stunned if Spurs aren't back into like a top 3 side within the next couple of years. Can he go all the way and take them to the Premier League? I think he'd have to channel his Porto Mourinho in terms of creating, like I say, that intense them and us spirit, because he's obviously not going to have finances to create the greatest squad in the Premier League. How far away? Maybe 2 to 3 years. Maybe that would, maybe in his final one of his 3 years, if we say that Mourinho normally sticks around for 3 years, maybe. But I still think it's a big ask. Pedro da Silva asks, what do you think is Harry Winks' future? Harry Winks, I think, is another one, and I don't want to upset people, but I think we often build up academy prospects, and then when they actually get in the team, we like to pull them down again. And I think, it's one of these where his names was, Harry Winksardo. That doesn't even make any sense. But if he was, a foreign player, I think sometimes they get a little bit more leeway. And I think he's still a very young player. Was he 23, maybe turned 24 now? Still learning his game. I asked him, it was only was it before the Leipzig game maybe? What Mourinho had been teaching him, and Mourinho has really been trying to work on his defensive side of his game, make him into a defensive midfielder, like that pivot, because obviously Spurs haven't had one in recent months. I don't think we've seen the proper Harry Winks yet. I think that's the key. I think when he and Mourinho work out exactly what kind of midfielder he's going to be, I think then you'll know. I like Harry Winks. There's probably a slight element of, I've kind of watched him come through the various levels. Obviously used to interview him back in the day when other kind of media were more interested in the big names, and obviously, you kind of form that connection with him. But I do believe on the pitch, I think we've seen him take on some of the Europe's best sides, and especially in the Champions League, I think he's absolutely turned up. I just think with him, it's about finding consistency and, like I say, working out exactly what kind of midfielder he's going to be. Lappers82 asked, do you think we will try to sign Philippe Coutinho this summer? I just don't see it. I don't see it. This is one of these where this is kept this part of the video and then Spurs sign him. But I kind of feel that was one that maybe was a Pochettino kind of player. Obviously, he played for him on loan at Espanyol from Inter Milan way back. And I can't see it. I think it would cost a lot of money. It's another one of those I just can't see in this summer being a logical transfer unless they could get a loan move. But then where does he fit in with Lo Celso? Probably just a straight no to that one. TB asks, what is your favourite game you were able to cover? I think it's got to be one that stands out. It's that night in Amsterdam. Honestly, it was, as a journalist, an absolute mess to cover, but still very well aware that you were witnessing one of the great moments in Champions League football and Tottenham history. Yeah, it wasn't the final. Yeah, it wasn't silverware, but you'd never forget moments like that. And for me, as a journalist, the Ajax fans were so upset every time Spurs scored in the second half. They were throwing their beer down. My laptop went absolutely mad. The mouse stopped working on it. Poor guy next to me from one of the national newspapers, his entire laptop just died. It was absolute chaos in terms of trying to write about that dramatic ending. But in terms of my favourite game, I think it's there. I think a close second will be the last game against Man U at White Hart Lane. That was everything it needed to be that day. It was perfect, down to the result, down to even the rain that produced the rainbow afterwards. An amazing day with all the legends. And then, as on a personal level, the first kind of a tie between the first game, the under-18s playing Southampton at the new stadium, and actually opening with Crystal Palace. I had a bit of a mare that night because on the way to that match, a white van just suddenly pulled across a roundabout and smushed into my car. So I had a bit of a dramatic night trying to get there, but actually getting there, and obviously people may know that I did all those couple of years of walking around the stadium as it was getting built. It kind of felt a bit of a connection to that place. So to finally see football being played there was pretty cool. But I'd still say that night in Amsterdam was just incredible. Hugh Cassidy asks, who are your best and worst managers, Spurs managers, since Bill Nicholson? Best. You see, this is a tough one. I think immediately you really should say Keith Birkinshaw. For me, though, I was too young really to understand the effect that Keith Birkinshaw had in those days. Terrific manager. So in terms of trophies, I think he's definitely would be the next there. In terms of my lifetime, I think the ones that probably had the biggest impact on me were Martin Jol and Mauricio Pochettino. I don't think they'll ever fully get the credit they deserve because they didn't bring any silverware, but I think both were incredibly important in taking Tottenham to another level to the previous managers before them. With Joel, I think he did more than the likes of, Hoddle, even Graham. I know he won the League Cup, but I still feel in terms of making the club a bigger club in terms of the league itself, and obviously Santini. And I think with Pochettino, I know there was a lot of love for Harry Redknapp, and AVB kind of did his thing, but I felt Pochettino then took it to another level after that. Worst managers, I mentioned Jackson Santini. That was more about the incredibly brief nature of his tenure, which was a bit weird. I never really took to Tim Sherwood. I don't know. It was something about the football wasn't great. I don't think he ever truly improved Spurs or took them on from the AVB's time. And yet, I don't know, maybe always gave off this sense that he believed he'd done something special, and I just couldn't see it. So that may be harsh, I'm sure he's a very, very good coach, and everyone that ever talks to him says he's a really good guy, but I just don't feel he sits in that list of great managers, if you see what I mean. Croucher James asked, do you think Poch would actually want to come back to Tottenham? Yeah, I think he would. One day. Not in the near future, but one day. I think there will definitely be a sense of unfinished business. He knows, he felt a real kind of love and connection with the fans, and I think one day, I think he'll come back. And it'd be really interesting to see what kind of state Tottenham are in at that point as well. The single player. Which new defensive midfielder should Spurs get realistically? That's the key. Realistically, that's the massive caveat in anything we say. There's some talented ones out there. You've got Kondogbia. I think he's got a £61 million release clause, I'm pretty sure. We've spoken about Zakaria, but he's worth, I think he's about 40 million they're talking. Camavinga, the young, 17-year-old, really young teenage kind of prodigy. These are all really, really good players, some younger than us. Kondogbia is a bit older, I think he's 26, 27. But it's big money, and I just don't know if this is the summer that's going to happen. You've got, I think, cheaper alternatives. You've got Nemanja Matic. I know, again, he's not a